We are live. Okay, we're live there. Live there. All right, Danny. Well, let me again just start off with just saying thank you for this today and being willing to sit down with me. I would like to start off with some very basic information, just like where were you born, and was this the same place that you enlisted / drafted from, and if not, where were you enlisted and drafted out of?
Okay. I was born in Battle Creek, Michigan in December 1948. Attended elementary, junior high, and high school in Battle Creek, Michigan. And I enlisted in the United States Army in September of 1967. I went to Fort Wayne in Detroit, Michigan for induction. And from Fort Wayne, I rode a train back to St. Louis, got on a bus that took me to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, where I took basic training in September. Actually, it was, September through November. And then in November, I got on a plane and I flew from St. Louis to Dallas in Washington, and then on up to Boston to Logan Field, and I was picked up on a military bus and driven to Fort Devens, Massachusetts for my advanced individual training, which I was from December through June at Fort Devens. I was in the Honor Guard, and our main functions were awards and decoration ceremonies for guys that had been overseas and came back. And then from Fort Devens, while I was at Fort Devens, my MOS school was Morse code, basic Morse code. And then I went to high-speed Morse code intercept school. Graduated there in June of 1967. June of 1968, excuse me. While I was in Morse Intercept School, Vietnam was really heating up. The Tet Offensive had occurred, and one of the motivators for our class was the instructors would tell us, well, if you don't pass this class, they're going to put you in the infantry and send you over for the Tet Offensive. So that was sort of a great motivator. From Fort Devens, I went to Two Rock Ranch, California. It was a Army Security Agency listening post, I guess you might call it, or station. And we did pre-deployment training there, copying Morse code. And in September of '68, I was sent to Vietnam from Two Rock Ranch, landed in Saigon. From Saigon, I went up to Nha Trang, and from Nha Trang, I went to my unit in the Americal Division, which was the 328th Radio Research Company, and we were just attached to the Americal Division for, I guess they said, the administration of UCMJ, and so we could get paid. But other than that, we were still part of the Army Security Agency, and our tasks daily came down from NASA, the National Security Agency. And they would send down our tasks when we copy and code. They would send us frequencies, units we were copying, and any other thing they thought pregnant to help us achieve our missions. And when I first got to Chu Lai, to the 328th, they didn't have a slot for me, so I was fortunate. Our commanding officer called me into the orderly room, and he asked me, he says, I was a PFC, he says, PFC Moss, I got a special assignment. Can you do it? And without knowing what it was, I said, sure. So then he explained to me that I would be working with a lieutenant or a captain, and each morning we would go over to the AmeriCal Division headquarters and give the general staff a top secret signal intelligence briefing. And that was Monday through Sunday. And so I did that for, I probably did that for close to 2 months, and then a radio position opened up and they needed me to come back to the company and sit radio position. While in that job briefing the general staff, Colin Powell was a major, and he was the S3 for the AmeriCal division. And one day, lieutenant comes to our compound, rings our buzzer. I go out to meet him, and he says, asked me where my boss was. And I said, probably at the old club. So he says, get him over to the dispensary or the hospital. We had a field hospital in Chulai. He says, get him over to the hospital. So I went over to the old club, got my boss, and I took him over to the hospital. He asked me what was up. I says, I don't know. They told me to take you to the hospital. So then he checks in, finds out what's wrong. He says, go get a captain. So I went and got the captain and found out that the general's helicopter had been shot down. The general, I think, had broken his leg or his ankle, and Colin Powell had broken his arm. And they were going to have to be put under anesthetics to get their bones set. And so they had to have somebody in that room with a top secret clearance in case they started muttering secrets while they were under anesthesia. They could write down what they were saying, and then the people that were in the room doing the surgery or whatever they were doing were then sworn to secrecy by those two guys, never to divulge what was said in that room. I was in the AmeriCal for about 15 months. I spent some time on an LZ called LZ West with the 196th Infantry Brigade. Set up a listening post out there with a linguist, a Vietnamese linguist, and he and I were out there I was out there for about 5 weeks, and then I had to go back in the set position again. And we would, I didn't have anything to do but keep him company and take his information in, because the information that I was picking up, I would just go over to the TOC, get on a secure frequency, and radio back to the company, hey, I got this guy on this frequency, it's at this time, you got somebody who can copy him, and they would do that. But the linguist, he was actually copying what the Vietnamese were saying and recording it, and then if it got real hot, he would say, hey, you got to go call the company and tell them we got this. And so they would have one of the linguists in the company get on that frequency that he had given me, and he would listen to it, and that would be passed on up to division. So after I got done with that assignment, I went back to the company, and while out on LZ West, things got a little hot. The 2nd NVA division had said they were going to push the that battalion of the 196 back out into the ocean. We were 3 miles from the coast, and so to help us out at night, especially, there was Puff the Magic Dragon. He would do a few orbits around the LZ and light up the countryside. And then during the daylight hours, there was the New Jersey sitting, I think he could only come into 2.5 miles because of the depth of the water. And then we were just about the end of the gun line. He was firing in 16 miles. So, and they had a 20-mile range, so that didn't leave much room for error. But that was fascinating to watch the New Jersey work out and to watch Puff work out. So when that, by the time that assignment ended, in my first 15 months in country, I had made E5, and I decided I wanted to go to aviation unit. And what our aviation units did, they copied messages, but what I liked best, we flew around and we fixed enemy radio terminals, and then we would pass that information on to the higher headquarters. And main mission that my unit flew, we flew the Ashall Valley from Phu out to the Laotian border, and then we would go north along the Vietnamese Laotian border, and every now and then we would get a wingtip into North Vietnam, and that could be hazardous to your health, so we didn't do that too much, but we would venture into the DMZ. And I did that for 14 months. And I had 1 month left in country when we had a plane, went up with 5 guys. They were doing intercept and direction finding, both. That was their capability. I qualified for that, but I couldn't fly that period because I didn't have flight orders. So they went up, and for reasons only beknownst now, I guess, to God, they got too far into North Vietnam and they got shot down, and their remains were never recovered. So I say I had a month left in country, flew one more day after they got shot down, and we weren't copying much code. We were trying to see if we could find a crash site inside South Vietnam. We saw a couple sites where there were fires, but then we got down to probably about 3,000 foot. That was the lowest. We weren't supposed to be that low, but we were chancing things, and we saw fires, and they had been crash sites from helicopters going in to try to pick the the South Vietnamese up, because we had a big mission at that time where we had reopened a Marine fire base called Khe Sanh, and from that fire base, the South Vietnamese were supposed to go in, interdict the Ho Chi Minh Trail and cut off the supplies. Everything went good the first 2 weeks, and after the first 2 weeks, all hell broke loose. The South Vietnamese got their asses handed to them. We lost a lot of helicopters, and it was just ill-planned operation. And in 1969, I think it was May 1969, maybe it's 1970, the 101st was out in the Ashall Valley, and they were on a hill and it became known as the Battle of Hamburger Hill. They fought out there, I think, for about 3 weeks, and they fought some pitched battles. And at the end of 3 weeks, it was so tight out there, as it was with Khe Sanh. We were had B-52s making airstrikes, what they call danger close, to keep the 101st from getting pushed off that LZ, but the NVA were already inside of that. So they couldn't retreat, so they just kept fighting. And then one night, it got deathly quiet, I'm told, and they quit fighting. And that morning, the 101st took the hill. They stayed out there on that hill for 2 weeks. And then we gave the hill up. I think we lost probably 240 guys from the 101st, and just to give it up. after we pulled off the hill, they could watch us. They watched us pull off the hill, and they came back to Hamburger Hill. But that was pretty memorable. And then, because I had to try to fix targets out there. And then there was another one called the 101st had a LZ out in the Ashaw Valley called LZ Ripcord. And they had a battalion out there. And they were giving the North Vietnamese more than they wanted. So the North Vietnamese decided they were going to kick the 101st off of LZ Ripcord. And it wasn't as bloody as Hamburger Hill, but there was some serious fighting going on out there. And that was, I think, that I recall, maybe the second closest I come to getting killed over there, because we were out doing fixes and things got slow, so the pilot in our plane said, I'm going to go in for a closer look. So he dropped down, and I had the ability to look at the ground through an old World War II bomb site. That's how we updated our navigational system. So I'm looking at the ground, and I could roll my device out to the wingtips and out to the nose of the plane. So I had seen a jet off in the distance, so I'm following with my eyes. Then I roll my bomb sight out to the end of the wingtip, and I'm following the jet. And I see him come in to make a napalm run. And so I told the pilot, I says, hey, sir, I said, you got to brake right. I says, I think it was A7, A6, just dropped the load, and he's coming right up under us. I know he don't see us. So we broke right, and I could see this. It was, I never forget it. It was Colonel was flying that plane, because I could see his silver wings on his helmet as he went past vertical, and we were going the other way. And that stopped my heart. But after that, that was my last day flying, I think. Close to my last day flying, because my last day was the day after we went out and tried to find our airplane that we couldn't find. Then I got orders when I got back. They said, hey, your orders to go home came in. I says, good. So I went back down to Saigon, and one night I was down there for about, there's a couple stories. One I'll tell you. When you get short, sometimes you get obnoxious. So I was short, didn't have anything to do in the company. I signed all my papers, and I was just sleeping there at night and going out and raising hell the next evening. So I went over to the enlisted club and had a few. So we hadn't had hot water for 6 weeks in the company. So I go back to the company, and I said, I'm going to take a shower. Man, I smell bad. So I got my towel and my soap, and I went to the shower. And I got into that water, and it felt so nice and warm. I got that shower, and I went back to my hooch. And I said, hey guys, you better hurry up. We got hot water. So 6 guys in the hooch jump up, grab their towels and everything, and they run to the shower, and then I hear these profanities directed in my direction. And they come back and they said, that water was ice cold. I said, it was hot to me, guys. I'm sorry. And so I got down to, so then a couple days later, I went on down to Saigon to process out of the battalion, out of the group. And I'm walking down the street one afternoon, and I hear somebody say, hey, Moss. And I didn't pay any attention. He says, "Hey, Moss!" And I turned around, and it was one of my instructors from Basic Morse Code at Fort Devens. He was a Green Beret, and he had got his 12 months in, and he was going home. So he says, "Come on to the club. I'll buy you a beer, drink with you now. You're not a slick sleeve nobody." So we went over to the club, had a couple beers, and then we left Vietnam a couple days later. And when I got home, I got to Oakland, and they said, you guys don't get in trouble, because for 48 hours you're still subject to the UCMJ. So I and a guy from New Mexico, we buddied up on the plane, and so when we got out, they paid us cash. They gave us cash. I got about $3,000 because I hadn't been paid in almost 2 months, and I had back pay from that, and I had accumulated leave pay. So we get let out on the streets outside the gate at 2 in the morning, and we catch a cab, and the cab driver says, "Hey, I know where the action is." And we said, "We do too, at the Ramada Inn, and that's where we want to go." So we went to the Ramada Inn, spent the night, and got up the next morning, went to San Francisco Airport, and I got on a plane, flew back to Battle Creek. And at the time, well, I flew to Chicago and then flew on to Battle Creek, because Battle Creek had I think it was North Central was service in Battle Creek out of Chicago. And so my dad picked me up, and I got home. My mother couldn't believe it. And that was the end of my military career.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. So I have you mentioned puff.
Yes.
I cannot imagine that being a military definitional code or an actual word. So where did that come from? Do you know?
Well, it was a C-47. This was before the AC-130s.
Okay.
And it was a C-47. He had 2 miniguns.
Okay.
And when it shot rounds out, they said it looked like a dragon's tongue. And Puff the Magic Dragon,
Yep.
So that's where Puff came from.
I guess that fits. It works.
Yep, that worked. And
never wanted Puff against you, though.
No.
No.
Because you saw that, and it looked like you could just walk from the plane to the ground, because every 5th round was a tracer, and he's shooting ungodly number of rounds.
Something like, I think it's 3. I think the minigun now shoots 3,000 rounds.
And Puff was shooting about 1,000 to 1,500, and he had 2 guns. So
Yeah. Oh.
yeah.
Now, when you were talking about Hamburger Hill, I could see it a little bit in your face. It looked like that was an angry moment for you. Were you upset with how that went down?
At the end, yes, I was upset, because as in a lot of things in Vietnam, we won the battle, we won the war, and we give up. The people, newspapers were writing about how bad it was, and so then the American people would say, "Well, it's not worth it." So we've lost 200 plus guys, and then we give up. Because people are getting tired, and the newspapers weren't treating us fair. They were talking about there was when I was in Chu Lai, there was the My Lai incident, and My Lai was when one of the units of the Americal had went in and murdered a bunch of civilians, and the helicopter pilot had discovered it, and so he called it in, and from there it got to the newspapers, and the only guy that actually got punished was a lowly 2nd lieutenant named Lieutenant Calley. And we always said that, Lieutenant Calley would not have ordered that on his own, but at the time, Saigon was wanting body count, and they didn't say friend or foe. They wanted body count, and my lie at unit that had gotten involved down there had been they would go in or they'd go out on a patrol, and they were walking on a lot of booby traps, and then they'd get near that village and kids would come out to sell them cokes, and the NVA, they were ruthless, you know. They'd give the kid a grenade and pull the pin, and when the kid got out there, he was supposed to drop the grenade and run, but kids can't outrun grenade fragmentation, and he'd take 2 or 3 GIs with him, and he'd go too, and the guys, I'm sure, had gotten fed up with that, and so they said, here's our chance to get even with some of that, and so that's how we had my lie.
Well, and another moment that you were talking about was that downcraft right before you got out,
yeah,
right before you got sent home. What was it that made that one? Because I can't imagine that was the only crash site that you guys had.
Yeah, that in the 15 months I was in that aviation unit, that was our only crash.
Okay.
And the next day, the people where we were working out of their building, they were copying code, and they had copied a message from a North Vietnamese air artillery unit that said they had shot down a plane. And just so happened that particular day, the only plane reported lost in South Vietnam was ours. And it ended up being in North Vietnam, and we could never figure out why it ended up being in North Vietnam. There was speculation that, well, they were headed kind of north, and they got hit with a missile, and they didn't have any flight controls, or the pilot. Some of those pilots, you know, we would get the pilots in, and they would have went through flight school and stuff, but some of them, we always speculated might have worked for other government agencies, like the CIA. And maybe that pilot was told that, you know, we want you to see how close you can get to drawing fire, and he got too close, and it killed 5 guys. So, you know, we'll never know that, because we had been out 30 years, or no, we had been out about 10 years, and we had started writing letters to the Department of the Army to try to find out if anyone knew why that plane got shot down where it did. Nobody knew. So what was told to us was, you know, after 20 years, the Department of the Army will declassify that and you can find out. So then after 20 years, the internet was coming into being, and the guys got together and we said, we'll have a reunion, and we planned it on the internet. One of the guys lived in Baltimore, and so he set up the hotel. That's where we stayed. And we had 4 guys. I still got the letter I wrote to the Department of the Army. We had 4 of the guys wrote, including the warrant officer, and they said, that's still classified. And I had, in Battle Creek, Dr. Joe Schwartz, he had been a representative, and then in Vietnam, he was a naval officer, and he had worked for the other guy, for the CIA. So I ran into him at the shoe shine shop one day, and I says, Doc, I wonder if you can help me out. He says, what do you got? And I told him. I gave him the aircraft tail number, the date it got shot, the time, it got shot down as far as we could tell from enemy radio messages. And so I said, we're just trying to find out why that plane was where it was, because it wasn't supposed to be there. So I ran into Doc probably maybe 6 weeks later, and he says, I got some bad news for you. I says, what is it, Doc? And he said, the guys that are still there that I have contact with said, just forget it. And that, that was another hot button. Just forget it, 5 guys, why they were there, but it's just forget it. Don't tell their buddies nothing. Just forget it.
Sure, that's really hard.
Yeah, that was tough. But that reunion we had, that first reunion, the guy that lived in Baltimore was a member of, I don't know if it was the American Legion or the DAV, but he was a member, and he knew a trumpet player or bugle player. So he hired out the bugle player, and we went down to the wall on a day trip. And it was probably, this is in June, and it's probably 95 degrees, no shade. I mean, it was smoking down on the wall, on the mall. And so, we're walking around looking at the wall. We find our guys, do our etchings. And then the bugler hit that first note of taps. And it got so quiet you could hear a dime drop. And that's when the tears started to flow. And the wives were with us. They said, well, what's wrong? And we said, it's just we've never been able to really express. I mean, my wife said, I never seen him like this. And so then we walked on back to the bus. And as we're walking along, if you look at the base of the wall, there's all this memorabilia, a lot of pictures. Because I was talking to one guy there, he was from the 101st, he had been on LZ Ripcord, and he said, well, all the memorabilia at the end of every day, we have to take it away, because, it just overwhelmed the place. So I saw this one guy's picture, and I said, wow. I said, boy, these guys were young. And then I said, that was us. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's my story.
Yeah, I broke down when my wife's grandfather died. He was a veteran, and he had the flag folded, and I was good up until the flag folding, and that's where I lost. And my wife looked at me and said the same thing. What's wrong? And I was like, you just can't understand.
No.
Because it's seeing that or hearing taps. We know what that is.
Yeah, taps, once.
It makes my hair stand up.
The way somebody said, well, what does taps mean? I says, taps means it's final.
Yeah. It's over.
It's over. Yeah.
Well, moving on to a little bit lighter of a subject. Were you the only member in your family to ever serve? I mean, I know you said you were born in 1948, so immediately I think, was your dad in World War II?
Yes, my dad was in World War II.
Okay. Did you have a grandfather in World War I?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay.
I had a dad, and I had 2 uncles in World War II.
Okay.
And because when I decided to go, my dad said, well, the decision's yours, son. I says, yeah, I says, they're going to get me one way or the other, so might as well be sort of on my terms, I guess. So that's why I went on and enlisted.
Okay. So I guess that kind of answers my next question as to, what was your family's reaction? Because, again, the Vietnam, I can only imagine, is maybe more your mother than your dad would have been like, no, you're not going. I don't want you going.
Mother didn't want me to go, but Dad said he's got to be a man. He's got to do what he's got to do.
Yeah, a veteran talking right there, type thing. And I mean, what are you going to do when a guy's fought either the Japanese or the Nazis,
Yeah,
right? Like,
yeah. He was in Germany,
Okay.
and we talked about it a little bit. And when he was in the military, the only basically the only jobs that African Americans could do was motor pool transportation, and he was part of that Red Ball Express, you know. And so I felt kind of, I guess, kind of proud. I want to say that I could be in the Army Security Agency and have a top secret clearance.
Mm-hmm.
You know, whereas all he could do was drive a truck, and he was a lot smarter than just driving a truck. Yeah.
So now, were you drafted / enlisted right out of high school, or what was the level of education you had?
Okay, I graduated from high school in June of '66,
Okay.
and I was working at Myers Supermarket. It was out in Urbandale Plaza, where Family Fair is now. And so I worked up, and then I hired in the post in June of '67. Because in '66 I wasn't old enough. I was only 17. You had to be 18 to work at post. So I hired in the post, and then I worked till September of '67 at Myers and Post, and I took military leave to go into service, and because I was going to get drafted,
Okay.
because I had dropped out of college, had lost my deferment, and the lady said, "Well, you know where you're going." And we had a lady at the draft board. I think that lady had to be one of the meanest people I'd ever seen, because there was a guy. I was down there, and I was in line, and he was yelling and screaming, and she come from behind the desk, and she had a cane, and she's shaking that cane and says, "Sonny, you know where you'll be in the next month, guaranteed." So he wore his welcome out. He was going. So that was kind of funny, but it was to me, because, you know. And then after you get to Vietnam, things, you know, after you're there a while, sometimes things get kind of morbid. Because I was in the Nang when I was in the aviation unit, and I think they called it the C-141. It was a big military jet transport that they used to ferry wounded back to either Japan or the Philippines or the States, you know. And that plane landed with some kind of emergency. They dropped the back door, and here's guys on wheelchairs and crutches, you know, and guys are sitting around. "Boy, I hope they make it. Look at them go. Look at them go." You know. That's why I say, you know, after a while, you know, your attitude gets kind of morbid, it seems like. And that was kind of funny. It was funny, but it wasn't funny.
Just your own way of coping with.
Yeah.
I still have issues with my level of humor is very dark. You know, a lot of my
Sometimes, yeah.
my friends are like, "Why are you laughing at that?" And I'm just like, "Well, you haven't been in the Marine Corps, so."
No.
So you were in the Army, obviously, but did you evaluate other branches, or were you just like the Army because my dad, there's a family line here, I gotta go that way?
I went to the Army because he was the first one that saw me after I come out of the draft board, and I knew I wasn't going to the Marine Corps, and I thought the Air Force and the Navy were a bunch of wimps. Yeah, because after basic, you know, we started talking about, or after I got to Vietnam, we said, boy, them Marines, they can take anything, but they can't hold nothing. You know, and then I remember one time I was over in the TOC, and the guys were laughing at the Marines. They said a Marine helicopter went out to pick up this prisoner that the Marines had captured, And so the prisoner and I guess it was three prisoners and the Marine get on the helicopter and they're coming back to the base. And so they asked the guy, "Who's your commander?" And the way the story goes, I don't know how much truth you can put into it, because one guy ended up telling me, he said, "Well, we were only 20 foot off the ground." He says the guy didn't talk, so the Marine shoved him out the helicopter. So the next guy, they're interrogating him, and he wouldn't talk. They shove him out. And so by then the third guy says, "I don't want to go out." So when they ask him, he says, telling them they already shoved him out the helicopter. But I heard that story, and then I heard later on that they were only about 20 foot off the ground, but I can imagine you're blindfolded, 20 foot.
Don't feel like a long time.
Yeah, I could feel like a real long time.
There's always going to be a little bit of truth because it is the Marines. If there's any branch that's going to do something crazy like that, it's going to be the Marines. Let's be honest. Okay. So let's break down a little bit of like what was basic training like. Just basic training, and then we'll look at your other school as well. But like, what were some of the things that they trained you up on? Like, what did you do in basic training?
Basic training, did a lot of marching. Then we got familiar. At the time, M14 was the battle rifle. We got real familiar with the M14. That's my generator.
No, you're good.
We got real familiar with the, what's the day?
May 8th?
I mean, this is Thursday, right?
Wednesday.
Wednesday, okay, yeah.
Is that why it kicks on?
Yeah, it checks itself.
Yep.
For 5 minutes. So we did a lot of marching, close order drills, uniform code of military justice. We learned our chain of command and that sort of stuff. We went on bivouac. That was our overnight stay where we pitched our tent. We marched to the bivouac, pitched our tent, spent the night, got up, broke camp, and then marched some more. And we were marching in Fort Leonard Wood. And so one of the guys asked the sergeant, says, "Sarge, how much further we got to go?" And he says, "Just over the next hill."
It's always over the next hill.
And it don't seem like we got to the next hill for an awful long time. It was one hill after another hill. So then after we got back from bivouac, they selected guys that they thought had an aptitude to be a truck driver. And they said I didn't have an aptitude to be a truck driver, but when I got to Vietnam, I got a driver's license. I could drive anything from a Jeep to a 2.5 ton. And that's what they put on my license, so that's what I could drive. And after basic, when I went to Fort Devens, there was a Battle Creek guy. He was the CQ when we signed into Fort Devens. And he told us, he says, "Hey, Battle Creek, I'll take care of you." I said, "Okay." He says, "If you don't like KP, join the Honor Guard." So I says, "What do they do?" He says, they go into the little burgs for parades, and they do awards and decorations parades here on post. I says, "Okay." So I joined the Honor Guard, which before we got there, it had been pre-OCS. So they still carried on a lot of the BS as far as the spit shine boots and breaking starch, and you'd have a in-ranks inspection, and they'd go around looking under your collar for threads, and that's how they got the duty roster for the weekend. Too many guys if you got too many gigs, you're going to be a CQ for the weekend. And I was a pretty sharp troop, so I never got CQ on the weekend, because I remember one morning, it was about like this morning, we're in ranks. We're in formation, and we got our in ranks inspection to see who's going to be on duty. And so the guy walks down. I'm in the second row. He walks down the first row. I'm in the second row. He comes down. He gets to me and he squints a little bit, and he says, "Damn, boss." And he goes on. I wanted to laugh, but I know I'd get duty if I did, because he had looked at my boots, and you could shave. I had my boots so shiny, and I didn't use glow coat. It was all spit shine. I had my boots shiny, and so I prided myself in that. And then when I was leaving the honor guard, I think I spent a week in the company, and I went over to the PX, and this guy says, "You know, when you were in the honor guard, I thought about stepping on your toe." I says, "I'm glad you just thought about it, because you saved yourself a good ass whooping." Because my boots, I mean,
I'm sure that took time to get those
Yeah.
to shine.
yeah.
No.
And then when I heard Sarge was going to put me on CQ if I flunked the inspection, I was probably put an extra hour that night. Didn't go to bed till about 1 o'clock, making sure no strings on my uniform, and boots were at a high state of gloss. Yeah.
All right, so we'll jump back. We'll go back to Vietnam real quick.
Okay.
Now, being a Morse code operator, I could be a little naive with this, but I don't know much about this particular job that you were doing. So could you explain kind of the daily workload, and then how did you feel like doing this? Because obviously I'm guessing taking in messages couldn't always be great messages coming in, and that so did that ever affect you? And then how would you deal with a bad day at the office, you receive something horrible or something?
Sometimes it did affect me, and what affected me was, I'd say 90% of our messages, we were just copying them, and we'd pass them on to somebody that could break them out.
Okay.
The 10% that could be broken out, the message had what we call a preamble, the start of the message. It would say message 100, and then a couple characters later it'd give the date, the time, and then you get a message 11, a 22, or 33. And those were almost like plain text. And you would call somebody from the traffic, we call them TAs, traffic analysis analysts. You call traffic analyst, and he'd come in, and as you're typing the message, he's reading it out. There's a warrant officer over his shoulder, and he's copying it all down, and he's called for the Jeep to take him over to the TOC, so he could pass it on. And at first, it was great to get a message like that, because, you get a chance. That was like a feather in your cap, and might help you get promoted, But then after you've been there a while, and you see how some of the things are run, and you've been out and talking to some of the grunts about how they get used for cannon fodder, you don't want to get those messages, because that means that the higher headquarters is going to put in ground assault on those, and you don't want to be the one that they have sent in a squad or a reinforced squad into what the message came out as, they just got a squad that you're going up against, and come to find out those guys have walked into a company or bigger. 18 guys against a company, that's not good odds, because you got 18 guys, you might have usually you got 2 machine guns and 2 M79 launchers, but still, if you're walking in against a company, a North Vietnamese company was usually about 60 guys, 18 against 60, you gotta be doing a hell of a shooting to.
It's 3-1.
Yeah.
Odds.
Yeah.
We like that in the other way.
Yeah. And then, it might not be a company. You might be walking into
Battalion.
a battalion,
Yeah.
you know, and you don't want guys doing that. So
No.
that's the way it was copying the code every day. You know, you copy it, and then at the end of the day, you're glad your day was over and you go to the club. But then when I got to aviation, we would be fixing targets, and you get a target 500 meters or less. 250 was the best we could get, and that was considered 500 to 250 to 500 was considered a visual. And we get a fix that tight, you know they're gonna put troops in on it because they want to try to find the radio terminal. They want to capture the radio operator or whoever else is around there. But then, you know, you get to thinking, and oh man, what if these guys are walking into a big base camp and they only got a squad or a company? You know, you didn't like you got to the point you didn't like those fixes were good. They were good for your morale, but you know, after a while you'd say, nah, I don't want to get any more of those. Mm-hmm. You know, because you know, if you got 500 to 750, they were going to send in an airstrike. Okay, yeah, you know, bomb them into the Stone Age, but don't send troops. You know,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, because
you almost feel responsible. Then,
yeah,
you know.
yeah, because I was talking. My high school wrestling team won the state championship my senior year, first one ever, and I was talking to my assistant coach. He was my English teacher too, and I was talking to him. We had a reunion, wrestling team reunion, and I said, "Coach, you know," and I've conveyed it to the VA when I go out to mail maintenance. And I said, you know, I look back, and what I missed the most is I never had a chance to grow up. I says, at 18, I'm in Vietnam, and I'm in charge of people, or I got a responsibility for people. I'm copying the code and, you know, passing the messages and stuff, and I'm responsible for a grunt that might walk into something. If I miss it, or if I have it right and the Army misses it, might get some guys killed. I said, and then after that, you know, I got to be a sergeant, and then I'm responsible for the radio bay. And those guys, they could, if the first sergeant pissed them off, they would develop selective hearing. So they're sitting there, and you go by and you say, "Hey, you don't have the guy up." "Oh, Sarge, I got a bad earache today," you know. And you say, "Oh man, you know, but you might miss something." I said, "Man, I got a bad earache today." You know he don't have no earache. Mm. He's pissed off at the first sergeant, so he's not going to do his job. And that would upset me. And then I told the coach, I said, you know, when I got out of the service, I went to work, and I get promoted to a supervisor. And you know, you're in charge of a multi-million-dollar operation. You're responsible for the people that have jobs to do. I said, never got a chance to grow up. Because I'd be talking to guys that didn't go, and they'd tell me how much fun they were having back here. And I said, oh, well. I said, I had fun too. I went to Thailand. And yeah, because I remember I was in Thailand. And I went to a place that was sort of like, you ever go to Binder Park Zoo? You ever been out there?
Yeah.
Well, they had a place in Thailand called Timland. And it was sort of like Binder Park Zoo. But they had everything. You could see a lot of the stuff. You could see them working bronze. and you could see the women knitting and weaving, see elephants moving logs and stuff like that. And so there was a guy there, he had, I think, what's smaller, a python or a constrictor?
A constrictor?
Yeah, I think it was a boa constrictor. He was about 6 foot, and he had it there. And so this lady I had with me, she said, "You want a picture?" I says, "Yeah." So I got snake here, she's here, the rest of the snake is over here. So I sent that picture home to my mother, and my dad. She said, "My son got over there and lost his mind." And I showed it to one of my buddies. He and I meet down at you interviewed him, Gene Gillette.
Yep.
I showed it to Gene, and he says, "Ooh, don't show me that." Yeah.
Thought y'all was gone.
No, we just chitting and chatting. And I showed that to Gene, and he shook. He says, "Oh no." But I was telling him, I said, "Well, one time, the hill I was out on, we'd hear screeching up in the ceiling at night. We didn't know what it was, so I said, I was over to the top, and I asked the guy what it was, and he says, "It's probably a snake up there killing rats." I said, "Okay." But I don't like rats, so the snake's doing his job. But I got back to our bunker, and my buddy was standing outside, the lingy I was out there with. And I said, "Steve, what are you doing out in the rain, man?" He says, "Man, the biggest fucking snake in the world is in our bunker." I said, "Oh yeah, where is he?" And I looked in, and he was over in a corner. So I went on in the bunker, and I got on one end of the bunker. And I said, "Steve, you coming in?" He said, "Not as long as that snake's in there." I said, "Okay." So Steve stood out in the rain for probably 3 hours till it quit. But I'm sitting there, got my legs crossed, got my M16 over my lap, and I'm sleeping with one eye open. And Steve said, "Well, if you shoot, it's probably going to ricochet." I says, "I'll get the snake, though."
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I says, "I'm not staying out in the rain." So then it quit raining, and the snake just slithered on back up into we had a layer of PSP, sand, and then between the sand, there was sandbags. So he slid up between the PSP and the sandbags, I guess. And he was happy he was dry again, and I was happy.
So how do you think your time in Vietnam changed you as a person? And do you think this was a good change?
I never really thought of it too much, but I think how it changed me as a person is it showed me that I was really a responsible person, that I cared about people. That sort of developed my character a lot, that I cared about people. And I always like to see the job get done, but have it get done right. And it taught me that if you treat people fairly, they'll work for you. I had that in Vietnam, and then when I got to be a supervisor at Post, my first boss, the guy that made me a supervisor, he says, your hardest job is going to be treating people right. He says, you can't treat everybody the same, but you got to treat the people right. He says, you'll quickly find out who the slackers are. We call them the 5%ers, the ones you got to spend 95% of your time is spent with 5% of the people, because whatever reason they don't want to work.
I've heard it both ways when it comes to making friendships in some place like Vietnam. So for you, did you develop friendships, or were you someone that was like, the turnover rate is so rapidly high that I don't want to expose myself. And did you find your way to like kind of like recluse?
Okay, well, in my unit, our only turnover rate was guys that were DROSing or ETSing, you know. So yeah, you made friends, but I could understand it in a line unit, you know, where if a new guy goes out and gets it the first or second day, and I'd hear the guys come back, yeah, well, so and so guy got it. Well, who was that? Oh, I don't know, some FNG. You know,
Mm.
those guys never really got close to guys, I'm sure. But when I was over there, first guy I ran into, I grew up with, and that was when I landed in Saigon. And we stayed in this hotel in downtown Saigon in the Chinese section. It was called Cholan, the Chinese section, and I ran into a guy I'd grown up with, and he was a security guard downtown there. And I said, "How'd you get this job?" And he said, "Man," he said, "I've been humping the bush for 10 months. One morning," he says, my platoon sergeant come in and says, "Pulley, they got an opening for a security guard downtown." And he said he probably left half his stuff in his hooch getting out of there. And so then I ran into him. And then when I got up to Chulai, it was just before Christmas in '68. And I'm walking down the street and I see this guy. And he's ahead of me. And I look at him and I said, "Boy, I don't know, two guys walk like that." And I says, "Hey, Fred Brown." He kept walking. So I said, "Fred Brown." He kept walking, and I put on a little trot, and I got up. I said, "Fred!" And he turned around, and he was my next door neighbor. And he was coming home. His time was up, and I still had, this was in December, so I still had 9 months to go. And so I said, "Well, what are you doing?" He said, "Man, I'm going home." I said, "Okay." I said, "Where you staying at?" He says, he said, "I got a cot over in our replacement unit." I said, "What are you doing with your pack?" He says, "You can't leave anything over there. Somebody will take your stuff." I says, "Okay." I said, "Well, I tell you what," I says, "I got an extra space in my hooch. Why don't you come over and flop there for a couple nights, and your stuff will be okay." And so he did, and so we went to see the Bob Hope show in December of '68 in the rain in Chulai. And then when I got up to Fubai, I signed up for R&R. And before I was processing out for R&R, and I run into this guy, the R&R clerk. I went through junior high and high school with him. He says, "I'll take care of you. I'll get you a good seat on the plane." I said, "Yeah, okay." So then after I got out, I ran into him. And then when I got back, and then I was getting ready to leave the unit to go to the aviation unit, and the mail clerk, I went to mail call, and he says, "Hey, there's another guy from Battle Creek here." I says, "Oh, yeah?" And he told me his name. I said, "No, I don't know him," but I looked him up. And he asked me, he says, "Well, when you get home, call my parents and tell them I'm okay." I said, "Yeah, I will." And so he ended up being a Springfield, when they had their police department, he ended up being a Springfield police officer, and he retired from that job. And I think he passed away 4 or 5 years ago. But his brother sells cars for Sunshine Toyota.
Mhm.
His name was Fred Gessner. I don't know what Fred passed away from. Probably something from Agent Orange. And then I get up to Fubai, and I run into the guy that lived across the street from me. And I run into a guy, his grandmother lived behind my parents' house. And I said, "Boy, I'm seeing everybody over here." And then I was in Fubai one day, and I go to the PX, And I see another guy, and I said, there's a redhead, I never forget. I said, what are you doing, Mike? He says, trying to get out of here. I says, okay. I said, but what's your job? He says, I'm the chaplain's driver. I said, well, that can't be too bad of a gig. He said, oh, it's terrible. Because at that time we were opening up Quezon again. And he said, it wouldn't be so bad, but the chaplain likes to drive out to Quezon every day. And he said, that's 30 miles. And I don't want to run into nothing. I'm getting too short, so I'm going to give this gig up. I said, okay. And then I ran into another guy when I was in Da Nang. I was going over to the CIA restaurant to get a hamburger. And I see this guy that I've been in junior high with. He was a year behind me. And we looked at each other. I said, Bill Baker. He says, yeah, Danny Moss. So we made small talk. I said, what are you doing down here, Bill? He says, well, we're here till they can fix the runway at Fubai. I says, okay. And I said, we're here until they fix the runway at Fubai, and then we're moving up there. So he and I hung out together probably for about 4 or 5 months up there. After missions, he would come over to my unit, or I'd go to his unit, and he flew a lot. He got to go to Thailand a lot, so he'd go to Thailand and he'd come back. And I says, what you got, Bill? He says, well, I got a little Thai stick and I got some Cambodian red here. He put it in the coffee mill, grind it up, and we'd smoke it. And I said, and that stuff was better than Excedrin for, your neck gets tight flying, But never smoked. I'd smoke when I got back, but if I was going to have to fly the next day, I'd just suck it up because I didn't want nothing to impair my job. But if I had the day off the next day, I'd roll one with him. And I still see him. I'll call him up sometimes and we'll meet at Coney Island for breakfast. Because Bill, when he got looked him up, and he said, you never guess what I'm doing now. I says, what, Bill? He says, I'm an assistant pastor. And I said, Vietnam was that bad? He said, it must have been. Cause when I met Bill, he was an E5. And he said he got out as a PFC. He said, because he got back to Fort Huachuca, and he was flying Mohawks. He said, flying around in the desert, just, taking pictures wasn't no fun. So he might miss a flight and he'd be down in Juarez. And then he'd come back and he'd get ridden up. So, yeah, Bill was something else. He is something else.
Well, I know this one is probably one you were expecting me to ask, and I gotta ask it. Did you experience racism or hatred towards you, or from your soldiers, or from your leadership? And did this factor into your morale while being over there?
Yeah, it was from the leadership, and because when I was in the aviation unit, and there was a rule that if you got to be the senior E5 and you were the shortest one in the company, you got to run the club. So you schedule shows and stuff like that. So I was coming up on 90 days, and I was going to be the senior E5, and I was the shortest one, so I should have got to run the club. So we had an E7 that was in charge of the club. So I went to him and I said, hey, Sergeant, I'm coming up on my 90 days. When do I train to run the club? And he looked at me and he said, Moss, I'm not going to let you run the club. I said, what? This bullshit. I said, I'm the shortest one, and I'm coming up on 90 days, and that's the way we've always done it. He says, but if you run the club, Moss, you'll get in trouble. I said, get in trouble? I knew he was talking about. He said, yeah, you'll get in trouble. I said, no, I won't. He says, well, and at that time, just before that, the Sergeant Major of the Army, I forgot his name now, but he had gotten caught in a big scandal. He was taking kickbacks from Carling and who makes Fresca, Coca-Cola.
I think so, yeah.
He was taking kickbacks through the PX system from them for ordering so much of their product, you know. And he said, look at the Sergeant Major of the Army, what kind of trouble he got into. I said, Sarge, I said, I graduated from Battle Creek Central. I said, Sergeant Major only had an 8th grade education. I said, I know I'm smarter than that. And he said, Moss, you're not running the club, and I don't want to hear no more. And that was probably the extent of the overt. There might have been some covert, but it run off your back like water off a duck's back.
There was more pressing issues than that at
Yeah.
the time, right? All right.
Yeah.
Well, a little bit more of a lighter subject. What was your funniest moment looking back at all of your time in Vietnam? And I know you have some dark humor, so you can let it fly here. What was the one that sticks out as you look at it, just like I just can't?
Well, I think probably the funniest one, and I might have said it, was when the night I'd come back from the club, a little overserved and hadn't had a shower in 6 weeks, so I go in the shower and I come back to the hooch and tell the guys there's hot water.
Yeah.
So they jump up and they said the water was ice cold. So the next night, I go to the club, probably get overserved again, and I come back, and my Foot Locker was there by my bunk, and so I take my lock off and I hear and so I run my hand around the top of my Foot Locker, and somebody found carpenter tacks, nailed my Foot Locker shut and painted them with camo stick. And I said, don't sleep, guys, I'm gonna get whoever did this. Yeah, that was probably the funniest.
Well, another one here. When you got back from Vietnam, obviously we've all heard the stories of how GIs in general weren't treated exactly well. What was your experience when you returned? Did you ever feel welcome back? And did you feel that the America you left to fight for was the same one that you were returning home to?
Well, let's see.
I know that's a lot.
When I got back and I flew into Detroit, I was at the airport at the bar, and this older gentleman came up to me. He says, and he looked. He says, "You just getting back from Vietnam?" I said, "Yes, sir." He says, "Can I buy you a drink?" I said, "Yes, sir." And he bought me a Chevrolet Regal on the rocks. But then when I got up to KCC, you know, oh, you guys shouldn't have been over there. You know, and you're baby killers. And I said, well, I had a job to do, and I said, I didn't kill any babies that I knew of. I said, wish you had been there. You might have been on the list with that attitude, but you know, that's about it. Because I know some guys was talking about people spitting on them and stuff. Yeah. I says, well, that had probably been World War II all over, or III, because somebody would have got waxed.
So, Battle Creek, it's very quiet here. It's not anything like a war zone at all.
No.
I'm sure that was night and day difference for you. How was transitioning to civilian life?
Well, you know, I don't know about when you guys came home, but when we came home, I was flying one day, and then when I hit my 10 days left in country, I had a pretty good unit. I didn't have to fly anymore. I processed out of the company. Then I went down and processed out a group. So I had, you might say, about 15 days to decompress. Whereas I talked to some infantry guys, and they said they get out of the field, process out of the company, and fly down to the replacement battalion, process out, and they were literally 5 days or less from walking out in the bush to getting out. But I like I said, I had probably about 10 or 15 days to decompress. So I think I used that to the best of my ability.
And then adjusting to civilian life, did you have anything like PTSD, do you think?
Yeah, I got PTSD. I got that now. And it's mainly dealing with, I didn't tell the story. One night my barracks got hit with a rocket. And I think I might have been smoking earlier in the night, but I was laying in the bed and something struck me, and I said, boy, I wonder what color death is. And I'm laying there and I see this orange streak go by my window. Because we stayed we were in Da Nang, and we had second floor Air Force barracks. They had 2-story nice barracks. And I see this orange tail go by, and I hear boom, and then boom. I said, holy shit, that's death. And so I jump out, I fall out of the top rack, and the guy below me, he was a little slow because I landed right in the middle of his back. And the guy on the other side of the wall from me, piece of shrapnel had come across his head. It creased him. He got a good burn, but it made a hole about that big where my foot would have been had I not reacted so quickly. And so then the next morning we got up and went and looked at the back of our barracks, and one of the rockets had come practically in the back door, and it had killed one of our civilian mechanics. We had civilian mechanics working on our aircraft, and they stayed on the first floor, the first half of the barracks. When that rocket come in, it exploded and killed one of the civilian mechanics. But I think that was pretty close. And then one morning I was in Chulai. I was going to wake the guys up. And usually I didn't go wake the guys up. One of the teletype operator where we were at, he would go wake the guys up. This was when I was briefing the general staff. He would go wake the guys up. So he was getting a message, and I said, hey, I'll go wake them up. So I walk out the door and I get halfway to the hooch and I hear, boom. It was close because I could hear it come out the tube. And next thing I know, not too far from me was a boom. And when I heard the whoof, because some of the grunts had told me, if you hear it come out the tube, better be flattening out. So I heard it come out the tube and I hit the ground, and then it went off, and I figure it was maybe a 60. It went 80 or 82. And I found a piece of shrapnel about the size of my thumb. But the guy says, how you know it was a 60? I says, because anything bigger, I'd have had some holes. You know, I said 60 is about like a hand grenade, I guess. Mm-hmm. I said, but that, if you get hit by an 80 or 82, or is it 81 or 82? We have 81s. We had 81s. They had 82s, and I was told the reason they had 82s was because if they captured our 81s, they could use them in their tubes.
Yeah, the 60 is what we use. They have a hand launch. Mortars are insane. Those guys, anybody that does mortars, I think they're just squarely in the head. But the 60s have actually what they call a hand launch system. So they can actually hold the tube and shoot it like almost like a bazooka type, essentially in that.
Shoot it like
like a gun.
M79.
Yeah, just 16 millimeter mortar. Yeah. Well, with that said, is there anything that you say or you do looking back that you can trace back to your service. For example, I have a thing like where I'll respond to some people with RAW, which is the Marine thing that Marines do, or I'll say kill, which is another Marine response. Typically, I get some weird looks back because I usually say it to a non-Marine who's like, "What are you saying there?" But is there anything like that that you have 50 years after your service?
Nah, not now.
Not now.
Not now, no. 'Cause I mellowed out in my old years.
I maybe someday that I'll eventually mellow out.
Yeah, I've mellowed out.
Now, after spending an incredible length of time in a war zone like that, has your opinion of war changed? Or if not, has it reinforced anything in your mindset when it comes to war?
Well, my opinion of it is, there's always been wars. And if you get into one, you want to get into it like Desert Storm to win it. Don't get into it like Vietnam where, I'll kill 10 of you, you kill 10 of me, then I'll kill 30 of you. That's not the way to fight the war. You fight the war to win it.
Mm-hmm.
Not the way we fought Vietnam. We didn't fight Vietnam to win it. We were trying to make a political statement in Vietnam. We didn't do that very well.
For sure. As this interview winds down, Danny, I would like to ask, is there anything you would like to include in your oral history that we haven't talked about? Looking back at your service, anything that stands out that you want to add to it?
No, not that I can think of. I know back in November 2023, I got the American Legion Veteran of the Year, not American Legion, but the NAACP Veteran of the Year award for Battle Creek. And I think that has something to do with my service and my liking to try to help people.
Okay.
Because I know one time there was a lady at our church, she had came home, and I don't know what, she was in the Army, but I don't know what she did. She'd been overseas, and her and her husband were both in the service, and they had gotten into it, and so she was staying with the aunt and the uncle, and her uncle had come. He says, "See if you can help her, because she's driving us nuts." I said, "Okay." So I went out to the VA, and I went to I forget the lady's name, but at one time it was in the basement of 39, but 39 is, they're doing repairs there now, so I don't know where the unit is moved to, but I went in and I told the lady the situation, that this lady needed help getting housing, and she gave me her card, and I gave it to the lady's uncle, and so it was happy home after that, I guess. So I guess he got her housing, helped her get housing.
Well, that's good. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
It's what we as veterans have to do. We have to stand up for each other. We have to help each other when we can.
Because I know when I was working, I had a guy. He was a helicopter mechanic. He had been he got out as an E7, but he had been a warrant officer. He had been a pilot. And one night we were just sitting around shooting a fat, and I said, "Doug, how'd you get to be an E7? He says, "It's a long story." So he said that he was a helicopter pilot, and his unit was on maneuvers up at Camp Grayling. And he said one evening, the commander's staff piled in his helicopter, and they went to the strip club up there, somewhere near Grayling. So he didn't think nothing of it, set the helicopter down in the parking lot, go in, and they have a jolly old time, and so they're going out. Somebody says this is a waste of government money or something, so I guess that caused the little difference in opinion. He said when they got back, he said all hell broke loose. he said he got busted down the E7. He said, and that was only because I was as low as they could bust him. And I said, well, why? I said, you were with your officer. He says, they said I should have used better judgment. I said, okay.
Often history is written by the victor, and we've kind of already touched on this a little bit. In the case of Vietnam, the American government would directly say that it was a failed conflict, right? Like they would say that they didn't win Vietnam. I have a feeling a lot of veterans would not agree with this statement. In particular with you, Danny, would you agree Vietnam was failed, or do you feel that you were successful in your mission of going over there?
I think, you know, I'm torn. I was successful doing the part that I had to do, but I was unsuccessful in helping us achieve the end goal of winning because I didn't have any control over the press. The press lost that war for us. That was the first television war, and the Viet Cong knew it, the North Vietnamese knew it, and Jane Fonda knew it.
Well, Danny, I would like to thank you for your time at the conclusion of this. It's been a pleasure doing this oral history with you, and yeah, thank you.
All right, and I'll drag that book while you're putting your stuff away. I'll drag